Now, it seems even winning a world war isn't enough to impress Gen Z, with a shock poll revealing that only a fifth of young Brits view Winston Churchill positively. The survey by the think tank The Policy Exchange found that the majority of the country's 18 to 24-year-olds regard the former PM as little more than a colonial racist whose policies they claim exacerbated the Bengal famine of 1943, in which up to 3 million Indians died. It comes in stark contrast to a BBC poll 20 years ago, which saw the wartime leader voted the greatest Briton of all time, ahead of Princess Diana, Charles Darwin and William Shakespeare. The popularity nosedive has been largely attributed to teachers fixating on the less heroic factors of Churchill's legacy in the classroom. So, what do you think? Should younger generations take more pride in Winston Churchill? Let me know your thoughts by emailing me at dan@gbnews.uk. Tweet me at GBNews, our poll running there too. But to help you make up your mind on this one, if you need it, former Tory Minister Anne Widdecombe and the Imam and broadcaster Ajmal Masroor. So, Ajmal, you have a problem with Winston Churchill, even though he saved us from Nazi tyranny.
I do. My families may have perished in India, Bangladesh, because of Winston Churchill's Bengal famine policy. 3 million Bangladeshis or Bengalis died because of that awful racist policy that he pursued. He preferred the crops and all the food stocks to be diverted to the European countries, especially England, instead of feeding the millions who were starving in India under British rule. And it is estimated that 3 million Indians, my ancestors, may have died as a result of that particular awful policy that was very racially motivated. Don't forget, Winston Churchill was a well-known person for giving preference to white Aryan race over the rest. In his pecking order, he even thought various white nations were beneath him. He preferred the Protestant over the Catholics. He preferred the Indians over the blacks. So while he may have been a war hero for Britain and Europe perhaps, he was nonetheless very well known for preaching racism, believing in social Darwinism, as well as directly playing an active role in seeing the death of 3 million Bengalis who died because of that policy.
Ajmal, you've made a lot of claims there. I think Churchill was more than a war hero to the UK and Europe. He was a war hero to the world, because without Churchill, arguably, Nazis would have taken over the entire world with the Japanese. But when it comes to your specific claim, and I want Anne Widdecombe to weigh in on this about the Bengal famine, I'm sorry, you haven't been reading or looking at the same history books as me, because Anne Widdecombe, when it came to the Bengal famine, it's actually far, far more nuanced than what Ajmal is making out. Churchill did have a responsibility to feed the British people and to stop the British people from starving, but he also made efforts in order to get grains to India too.
After the 3 million died.
I'll get Anne to come in here and then you can respond again, Ajmal.
Indeed, but I hope that this conversation isn't going to become fixated on the area that my opponent wants it to be. Because the question was, did the young people admire Churchill? Now, let me say this. If Churchill had not successfully stood up, not only to the Nazis, but to the appeasers in this country, so that we did actually finally declare war on Nazi Germany, if he hadn't actually stood up, and then stood firm through defeat after defeat after defeat, if he hadn't actually done all of that, then these young people would be growing up in a country where we had swastikas flying in Whitehall, British Jews in concentration camps, if by this time there would have been any left, and government from Berlin. Now, that is what would have happened if we hadn't had the towering presence of Winston Churchill, not just declaring the war, but keeping Britain's spirits up, as I say, through a whole series of defeats. I mean, there was a time when Churchill himself said, haven't I got one general capable of winning one battle? That's how bad it was. But he was resolute. He knew right from wrong. He knew the sheer evil of Nazism. at a time when there were people in Britain even who admired Hitler. He understood it and he fought it.
Indeed, very good points, Anne Widdecombe. And I guess, Ajmal, one thing that I think when I'm listening to Anne there, tough decisions are made at times of war. And obviously it was a tough decision about where resources had to be distributed. But do you understand Anne's point that actually when you look at Churchill on the whole, he is possibly, I believe, our greatest ever Briton?
Yeah.
It's interesting, Dan, when I said my point, you said I've been reading the wrong books. They were not the same books as you have. And when Anne Widdecombe made her point, you said she made great points. So it quite clearly shows how objective, arbitrary you are in this debate. But let's leave that aside. Let's go back to the facts.
I have my opinion on this, Ajmal. Hey, I hold my hands up, Ajmal. I think Churchill was a great man. I don't think he was perfect, but I think this rewriting of history is disgusting.
Okay, so
and Ajmal, on my show, I'm honest about what I think, okay? So that's what I think.
Dan, I'm glad.
But I'm giving you a say too.
I'm glad you're happy to promote as well as support and champion a racist. Ask the Bengals, people who also Churchill was responsible for, and 3 million died. Forget about Bengal for a second. He did not agree on self-rule of people in Africa, Australia, in the Caribbean, in America, India. He did not like Chinese people. He did not like Arabs. He did not like anybody but the white Aryan race. And that's what you're promoting, Dan. It's very well done by you for championing racism and saying this racist person should also be championed by young people. I'm very happy to see British young people are standing up and saying, hang on a second, our history needs to be evaluated. If somebody was racist, let's call them racist.
No,
let's
Ajmal,
not glorify racism under any circumstances.
To say that my support of Winston Churchill is championing racism is something that all well-thinking British people will think is absolutely ridiculous. Anne Widdecombe, this was a man who was born in the 1800s. We have to look at history in context, don't we?
Well, indeed. And you used a phrase, you talked about tough decisions. Now, let's remember what Churchill did to the French when the British shelled their fleet at Malzerkabir and sank it with the loss of thousands of French lives. Why did they do that? Because they didn't want the fleet to fall into Nazi hands. Does that mean that Churchill hated the French? They might hate us since then, but does that mean that Churchill hated the French? You do have to take tough decisions. You do have to do things which you know will cause suffering in a war. It's not a gentlemanly disagreement. It's not a playground fight. It's a deadly, serious business.
No,
why did he call the Chinese the great barbaric nation? And why did he claim to be civilized in that particular fight? And he said,
Ajmal, do you judge Gandhi by all of the racist comments that he made? Ajmal, is Gandhi a bad man because he made racist comments against Africans? No.
You know what Churchill said about Gandhi? You know what Churchill said about Gandhi?
Yes, but answer my question. Do you judge Gandhi because of the racist comments that he made?
No, I'm not here to defend or talk about Gandhi. Gandhi was irrelevant to me. I'm saying something very simple. You want to glorify Churchill in Britain because you think he was a war hero.
No, I don't want to glorify him. I know he was a war hero. I know he was a war hero. I know he saved us from the Nazis. And Widdecombe, final word to you.
The only claim to fame for you was that he was a war hero. That's it. Otherwise, he was racist, and he was racist against all men.
Ajmal, I've heard you. I want to give the final word to Anne.
In which there was widespread racism. Gandhi was one of those who made racist comments. If you actually look at the literature of the time, there are hugely casual racist comments everywhere. Yeah. We have developed since then. Yeah. That doesn't
They were racist, they were sexist, they were homophobic. We don't support that. We've developed as a society. But it's also not a reason... No, not shame on me. Shame on you for doing down Britain, because you're the type of person that wants to delete William Shakespeare. You're the type of person that wants to make sure that every historical figure is damned by judging them on the standards of today. And that's not how history works, and it's not how history should work. But I appreciate the debate. That was the political firebrand, former Tory Minister Anne Widdecombe, and the Imam, Ajmal Masroor.